So, on with the show. Um, as I say, met Josh a couple of weeks ago and was found your talk that you did, Josh, on structural engineering and some of the key things to look out for very inspiring. It was something that I'd not heard before at a networking event. Um, and that kind of needs to be the basics, really, of trying to understand properties and how they work. It's kind of a cliche that they're a living organism and that things can go wrong with them just the same way, the human body can. But it really stuck out to me because I'd been in a state agency for a number of years and had worked with a number of developers. And it was only after 4 years of my estate agency career that my boss actually had to explain to me what underpinning meant. Because we basically had a property that where the drainage had collapsed underneath the property and it was a wimpy no fines. And the whole crack went up the side of the house and it looked like the whole thing was going to fall away. Um, that was needless to say, there was red ash in the floors, which had caused the floors to expand. But it was actually the drainage collapse that had caused most of the damage. And the person that bought the property bought it for cash at 60 grand. They did the underpinning, and then they were able to remarket the property within several months for 90 grand without doing any internal cosmetic work to the property. It was literally that simple of adding value by going in, buying it cash, getting the basics of the work done, and then get a bit back out on the market. So for those more savvy investors, those most savvy developers that are not necessarily um, looking at the more basic routes of flipping properties and doing sort of commercial conversions and supported housing, all this kind of stuff, there is a lot of money to be made, and you are the key to that success. So I wanted to get you on, Josh, and basically explore some of the experiences that you have on a daily basis because I find them fascinating. But before we do that, how are you doing? How's your week been? And are you excited for the weekend?
Thanks very much for that introduction, Chris. Very kind of you, and it was lovely to meet you as well a couple of weeks ago. I'm all right, thank you. Busy old time for us, it seems always in residential structural engineering, but we have found a bit of a niche, I would say, in terms of your typical structural engineer, in that we are catered towards residential developers that need clear communication about how to uh, resolve problems or identify issues before they become issues. So yeah, weeks are really busy for us at the moment. I've got a young family, so juggling that as well as a busy work schedule is tricky at the moment. But we are a small group of very passionate engineers that want to, as I say, help by having the utmost clear and simple communication methods. Because really, a lot of the time with structural engineering and property, it's the lack of knowledge and actually having someone who can explain issues very simply and clearly. So it really is something that we value quite a lot in what we do every day, and it reflects in the feedback we get from our clients. So generally, we work for larger house builders. So our majority of our work is for your, your well-known national house builders. And we help them through from anything from acquiring a site through to actually helping them once the site is in construction and they've got issues with plots during build. But we have got a wide experience in delivering those sites, whether they be from 10 plots up to 300, 400, but we've got even some that up to several hundred at the moment. It's that scale. So yeah, it's a very varied and interesting working pattern and working week that we have.
It is there's so much that can go wrong with it in terms of the structure of a property, the way it's balanced, what can happen over time. Um, but what I want to do is I want to take it right to back to the start because you've been doing this for about 12 years now. and I
Yeah.
believe it was your dad that got you into this line of work. Can you tell us how this all started, um, how you got into structural engineering? Where does it all
Yeah.
come from?
Yeah, you're right, Chris. I've had a passion for building design probably from being a kid. I'm from South Yorkshire, so got quite humble upbringing in and around Barnsley. So as I say, always was into drawing, building design. I think when I was into sort of school age into A levels, I think I thought I wanted to be an architect. And actually, the more I followed that through, I realized that I didn't have the flamboyancy and the creativity that architects need. And picking through the options in terms of where to go with your career, I realized that I was pretty good at maths, like the number crunching, like the problem solving element of it all, and the science tied into that. So that naturally led me down more of an engineering route, and then really started to understand that structural engineering was a profession that you could help deliver an architect's image or a vision into how that actually gets constructed. So that opened up a whole world of wow, this I could make a career out of this. And as I say, alongside that, I was always very hands-on in terms of supporting a family business with not only sort of a retail business rather that mum and dad had, but also in starting to learn about investments and having that understanding of in the simplest form, what is an investment property and how can we make that profitable for a long term benefit. So yeah, I was on hands on with dad pretty much through my teenage years in terms of ripping houses to bits, putting them back to brickwork, and then fitting kitchens and bathrooms. It's been something that I think it really keeps you grounded, knowing of all of the aspects that are involved, not just the actual end product, but actually delivering a project, even if it's a simple two up, two down. It really, from that basis of understanding that, gives you so much more appreciation of everything. So yeah, from there went to university from sort of upbringing in and around South Yorkshire. Went to university, studied civil and structural engineering, and then fell into a more, I would say, a consulting engineering job with a larger business for the first 5, 6 years. So that gave me really big exposure to big steel frame design and concrete design in central London, and having quite a lot of exposure to high profile projects with really tight timescales, program driven, understanding all the constraints commercially. So I wanted to get that under my belt for sure to understand really what the scale of construction is like. And then it was only really in the last 4 to 5 years when I've actually honed in on residential construction. A friend of mine, Laura Holland, who I actually went to university with, she had recently set up a business from her predecessor who was sort of retiring, and it was primarily serving the residential market of house builders. So she reached out to me about 4 or 5 years ago and sort of asked if I would like to support in delivering and growing this small consultancy. To which I've jumped at the chance really because it's something that I've always wanted to do, grow a small team, and not only that, it being an industry that I can really make an impact on. Being residential, you've really got that opportunity to sort of to help your clients, firsthand, and also have that local feel of making a difference to everything that you sort of do and see. So yeah, it's been a really busy 12 years, but yeah, we're just going from strength to strength really in terms of success now in the business that we're growing.
Now, with my background in estate agency, my impression of structural engineers is that you go in and basically, when a house is falling down, you then go and sort it out. And I imagine having, being proudly from Barnsley, particularly as a strong powerhouse of mining communities that are across South Yorkshire, that would have kept you quite busy alone. But structural
Yeah.
engineering is a lot more deep than that, if you'll pardon the pun. It starts a lot more before that. I mean, some of the conversations that I've had with developers is that, you are coming in well before the planning stage in terms of assessing a site, whether it's viable or not. Looking at the geology of the land, looking at how the foundations are going to sit. There's a few people I can see on from the West Midlands that might remember the housing estate that was on in Polesworth, just outside Tamworth, and that was 14 houses that got built, and they hadn't done a thorough enough geology report, and the entire back end of the estate slipped away and subsided, and all the houses had to be condemned as a result of that, and a lot of people lost a lot of money. So basically, you're there right at the beginning of that process to ensure that kind of thing doesn't happen.
Yeah, we are, Chris. It's something that we have got a lot of internal experience in interpreting geotechnical information and making sure that we develop the right foundation solution for sites. So, yeah, obviously we support in terms of existing properties, but as you say, the key for new builds going forward is ensuring that you've hit the nail on the head. Really, there is that there is a sufficient amount of investigation done at the point in which it can inform design. And we don't see it as much now, probably as maybe that instance that you mentioned there. Developers are getting very, very wary of the importance of that. So it's starting to really make that traction. But we take that information and we can do so much with it to actually understand from that piece of work whether or not a site is going to be viable, because we're working on a site at the moment that is maybe 6 plots, I think it is. It all needs to be piled. It's completely affected by mining legacy issues. So the cost involved relative to the size of the site before they even get out the ground is huge. So early engagement in understanding what the ground is doing on that site is probably one of the biggest things that we shout about to all of our clients and developers now. Once you're above ground, particularly in the sort of larger house builders, they're trying to standardize as much as they can that construction. So, each contractor has got their set piece of work, the designs are set. Everything should go according to a very clear and detailed set of instructions. The unknown is always in the ground. And even despite having that knowledge and that working that through, we will still get sites where we've done as much, I would say, caveating and optioneering as possible, but we'll still get sites that they'll come up with a feature or they'll find something in the ground that just means that the whole project can stop sometimes. It's not often very often, but we try to ensure that we've got options in place to know that if we encounter this or we encounter that, we've got a plan in place. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The ground it's something that we want to try and be as early engaged with as possible.
And some of the properties that I dealt with, you would kind of know based on where they were, whether during the searches there was radon gas going to come out in the searches, and they were going to need to sort of get a little bit more clarity on that during the inquiries. So I could build up a picture of where certain place properties were in a town based on what kind of stuff was going to come back either at survey or based on during the searches. Are you finding that as well? Have you sort of got a clear image of where sort of certain sites are going to cause a bit more of a problem than others, or is it completely unique to each site based on sort of history, geology, geography, all of the ologies?
Yeah,
And then you just have to take a thorough assessment based on each one as you get to it.
we're trying to we find that in engineering, and particularly the specialists within, would say, the design team of a project, need to have that local knowledge to really have that ability to be helpful and efficient in the scheme, or to a client who maybe work in a certain area. So because we have developed, I would say, a set of clients that we work for, we find that we are working in a certain part of the country, typically East Midlands, right down to West Midlands, and a little bit further afield now. But we like you say, we know patterns based on experience from other projects. We
Mm.
know where sites are going to be tricky based on ground conditions. There's certain areas of the country that will always have really poor ground because of where they are. There'll be things that's historic, like you say, mining or gas related. But what we find is that if we maintain that presence with the clients in those areas, it allows us to be more, I would say, useful and effective to clients, because we can say, we've worked on nearby projects, and quite often we've won projects from working on nearby things. So we've actually said, oh, we had a client approach us last year who said, oh, we know you're working for that client over the road. I know the site manager on there. He's put us in touch with you. And again, because that had a very unique issue with fissures in the bedrock, we developed a solution for that site, and he wanted to lean on that experience. So yeah, I think we appreciate that every site is different and it has to be taken on its own merit, but there are themes in which can already be brought to the table that you'll be able to use or adapt before you even sort of look at any information.
I think with developers, the biggest stress that comes is the unequated things that can go wrong. It's the not knowing, because it's not a set process in terms of building a house. It should be, but it's not. It just never goes that way. Budgets overrun, trades don't turn up on time, and things can go wrong during the build. So developers are increasingly looking at ways that they can sort of almost preempt what's going to go wrong. And one of the common bits of advice that I've heard from many experts on these webinars is that you need to go out and see the site. You need to walk the ground before you even consider, putting a planning application or looking to make an offer on it. You need to go out and walk the ground and establish what's there. In your experience, is there anything that developers can keep an eye on, things that they should be looking at an empty site, that will sort of help them not necessarily do your job, but just give them a little bit more of a feeling about how your report's going to come back based on what's there?
Yeah, in the simplest terms, it's an awareness of all of the things that could have an influence, whether it be on the build or whether it could be down the line in maintenance. One of the simplest things that we get involved on a daily basis is trees. And in one aspect, it might seem quite obvious, but actually, it's really, I would say, quite misunderstood, or not appreciated fully. So, for example, walking a site and looking at the extent of trees on the boundaries, trees in the site, looking at the ground that you're actually stood on, you only need to sort of put a spade in the ground and understand, are we on to, are we got clays at the surface? Have we got, granular sands? All these things can be quick indicators of, actually, are we going to have things here that's going to influence the design? Trees generally can affect foundations quite substantially. Retaining walls, levels of sites. Again, an obvious thing to say: is it a flat site? Is it a really sloping site? How's the water managed? If you're going to introduce new property, new roads, how's that drainage going to be integrated? There are obvious things, but when you add them all together, it can make or break a project. I think above ground, as I say, things can be a bit more controlled, but it's the interaction of all of the environment that it sits in, the position it sits in, access, boundary conditions. All these things can really play into whether or not a site is going to be tricky, not just through the build, but actually once it's in occupied.
Yeah, trees is not one I was expecting you to say. Now you said it, it sounds obvious, but Yeah,
Yeah,
trees is not the one that I would have in the back of my mind. I'm picturing a field. It's on a bit of a slope,
yeah.
and trees are not coming into my periphery vision. So it's a case of that could have a massive effect. Um,
It is, and just because it's not on your land or on the site you're looking at doesn't mean to say it's not going to have an issue. The trees can have an influence beyond your boundary, so it's
yeah.
taking that wider vision of actually what happens beyond that boundary. We had a really tricky site last year where this issue was just the problem in the sense of like I didn't appreciate that there was these big trees the other side of the fence, and that was in someone else's land and they didn't want to cut it down. They didn't want to do any alterations to the trees. So the knock-on effect meant that that developer then had to enhance the foundation of an apartment block, maybe a terrace of 2 or 3 plots, all because of this local couple of trees that didn't belong to them, but it
Mm.
was out of their control. So they had to effectively design for it, and then ultimately the warranty provider that provides the warranty for this for the end product needed to know that them aspects have been considered.
So we've talked quite a bit about new builds. We'll have
Yeah,
quite a few developers that might be doing commercial conversions, doing flips, and certainly that's sort of the experience that I have going out and seeing those kinds of projects where this is not advice. You probably squirm at this, but an old boss once told me that if you can fit the nib of a pencil in it, uh, in the crack, then it's one to be concerned about. If you can't, then I wouldn't worry about it. Um,
yeah, I've heard that before.
have you? Right. What, in terms of sort of the structural issues that you see on existing properties, what are the sort of common ones and what are the sort of stuff that, developers need to be aware of?
Yeah, so what you need to do when if you are looking at purchasing a property that you know already has issues, or you are walking around it and experiencing these for the first time, you need to take an appreciation of actually what is it? Is it a local crack or is it and where does it come from? So actually, I'll just share my screen, Chris, just for a little bit of context. So I'll just bring this up. You can see that, okay?
Yeah, great.
Yeah. So cause of damage. This is just somewhere I would often start as a means of just trying to understand what is it you're looking for, or if you found an issue, how do you identify is it a problem or isn't it? So it's to try and distinguish really between is it to do with the ground or is it to do with the building itself? So I've just listed a few items there where the distinguish becomes quite clear. So when we're talking about the structure, we're talking about the actual walls moving or shrinking rather than the materials themselves that create the walls. We're talking about corrosion of maybe steelwork within a wall construction. We'll talk about deterioration of the material that creates the shell. So water ingress, for example, that's coming from everything above the ground. Whereas below the ground, we're talking about movement of the soil as a result of volume changes in the clay. So this is something that people might not be familiar with. And what is subsidence? That's a whole subject that I'm, more than happy to explain to sort of viewers and on a maybe a more of a detailed webinar. But subsidence is movement of clay soils due to volume change. You'll have poor ground on some sites that's settled. You'll have drainage issues that's, as you mentioned earlier, that's causing settlement. You'll have mining issues. They are two ways of distinguishing what is the damage, what could be the damage that you'll see. So practically, how is that able to be identified? So what you would need to look to do is externally look for visual signs which in the clearest and most simplest form are step cracking from window openings. So if we're thinking about issues to do with the ground settling, you are looking for step cracking in the brickwork. You're looking for cracks that get wider at the top than they are at the bottom. They may be located between a house and an extension, either to the side or to the rear. bay windows is a common one. They project out the front. You might be seeing bulging or leaning of walls. So you want to be looking for key signs such as this, and you want to also be looking for where how is the water managed on the property? How does the drain that downpipe from rainwater gullies get to any drainage? Where is the downpipe? As I mentioned earlier, are the trees nearby? It's a real common issue that can be related to ground movement, or is there opportunities for you to find that there's been some trees that have recently been taken down? So they're good prompts. I've got some little pictures here, which again, you mentioned this about getting a pencil in there. You can definitely get a pencil in that crack, and that's one, as you say, you want to be considering. It's when what I would say is you might ask when shouldn't I be worried? Well, it's really when they are hairline and possibly they've got the evidence that they have been there for a number of years. So a simple one might be that it's full of dust or cobwebs have grown over it. So such that the cracks are so historic that there's a likelihood with a series of investigations and going through the correct measures that whatever movement has happened has sort of ceased. It's where cracks are fresh and you can almost see really sharp edges on junctions in finishes. That's where it would suggest something recently has changed to have caused the ground to move, the walls to have moved. That is the distinguishing factor. New builds, I would say, are slightly different because they are new construction and there's associated aspects of new build construction that means that thermal shrinkage, drying out shrinkage of block work can bring about issues there that need to be managed separately. But I think that's more of a niche issue on new builds managing that construction process. So visual signs again, looking for doors that don't shut, cracks that come away from windows or ceiling junctions. Have you got a sloping floor? If you rode a ball along it, would it just roll to one edge? Does it look like someone's patched up part of the wall recently? Have they painted over a crack? Are they trying to hide something? Is pull furniture out of the way, look behind walls. Is the reason that furniture is where it is because there's hiding something? And then not always very obvious, but is there any, ask the questions. Is there any exclusions on the insurance? Don't be afraid to prompt the vendor to respond to questions like this because, that ultimately it's only going to be an issue down the line of potentially purchasing or completing on a property that if you don't have these questions brought up now, just to take away the risk of it delaying or potentially knocking or making the sale fall through.
Yeah, I mean, I've dealt with a lot of flips, and with the developers that are going in and doing those flips, time is money, and particularly around this time of year when they start plastering the walls and they try and get it dry as quickly as they can, and the walls end up cracking. They paint
Yeah,
over it, and then what happens is you always get some first-time buyers that come around to look at a property with their dad, and their dad's got no experience in property whatsoever, but starts tire kicking and says
yeah,
basically the house has got structural issues because
yeah.
there's cracks in the plaster, but all it is from the plaster drying too quick.
Mhm.
And that's really, really helpful seeing a visual representation of what it actually looks like
Yeah.
versus, yeah, what someone thinks is going on there. Um,
You just got to be led by instinct, and as I say, be curious when you're looking around properties to know if something doesn't feel right, probably isn't, and you've got to I was going to say, just be curious and always ask the obvious questions. And if you don't get an answer or you get an answer that doesn't feel right, then it's probably one to go, well, actually, is it an opportunity then for you to go, well, actually, there's an opportunity for me here to then negotiate? And
yeah,
that's one aspect I try and explain to some investors and developers is that just because there is an issue doesn't mean that's the end of the line. It means that you could have an opportunity here to actually negotiate on a sale price. But it's knowing when that does play in your favour.
Absolutely. Guys, if you've got any questions for Josh, please do put them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. Share us some of your horror stories or your experiences that you've been faced with when you've seen properties. Let us know if there's any issues that you would like to understand a little bit better, or even for Josh to help explain what underpinning is, because obviously that's it can put a lot of people off when you start mentioning about underpinning. But before we go there, Josh, we love a horror story on this. So I was wondering, in terms of the sort of cracks you've shown us, in terms of some of the sites that you've dealt with, is there any sort of that spring to mind in your experience over the last 12 years where either the developer's not done the work that they should have done or had you out earlier? Is there anything that's happened that's been a bit of a catastrophe that, could have been dealt with sooner? Share us your most harrowing stories.
Yeah, and we it's not something that we can often shout about on our socials because we are involved with a lot of the new build developers. I say I'm not making any might mention any names, but because we are involved with them and they work at such a pace, we are regularly involved with remedials. How can we, respond to issues that are live on sites? And what I think a general thing to say about that is that I am finding now, I would say, an industry professional supporting the construction of new build houses, that the skill set of I would say the trades generally is so varied, and that is having it's varied, and also there's such a lot of pressure on site managers to deliver on set targets and meet deadlines. So it has an effect on the construction, and we have seen instances where that has resulted in, I would say, catastrophic failure of of the structure. So, as I say, without mentioning any names, we've had an issue in the last couple of years where, because a timber framed house, which again, not people, many people might not be aware of this, but timber framed construction of properties in new build is really popular now. And so many developers have got their own businesses delivering timber frames, and that is the frame that's inside the external brickwork. So to a normal eye, anybody looking around a property, it wouldn't be that obvious. But timber frame construction is getting really popular. We found a catastrophic issue where the timber frame hadn't been appropriately tied to the external brickwork, and that resulted in the whole gable of a house, pretty much from eaves level, gutter level above, on a fairly windy day, collapsing onto the road.
Wow.
Catastrophic, and it could have been so much worse, as it had somebody been, and I think it caught on a doorbell camera that someone walked past just 5 minutes earlier, and all that brickwork came down onto the road. So the point I'm trying to make of this is that these things do happen, and it can be resolved. It can be dealt with appropriately. But the main cause, to my mind, is I would say, the skill set being so varied and such that they're not truly understanding all of the critical details of construction. When things change slightly, as I mentioned, timber frame probably quite new to some trades in terms of how that integrates with a bricklayer, for example, and building a traditional cavity wall. That can have an effect, and we've seen that. So yeah, that's one really really extreme story that thankfully no one was hurt, and it was successfully remediated, and that issue's now gone away. But yeah, that's one instance of a real life issue.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of stories of people just sort of doing works on properties or not doing works. There was a similar case of where they'd taken the chimney breast out on the ground floor, and weirdly didn't remove it on the top floor, but basically tied the chimney, well, should have tied the chimney to the joists, so that it didn't just basically the whole stack fall through the floor. And they thought, oh, it's all right, we'll just stick an indemnity on it. And the mortgage lender went, absolutely not. No, you need someone in there, a full structural engineer like Josh, to come in and pull the floorboards up and make sure whoever's done that work has done it to not only building regs, but like can prove that they've done the work to a high standard. Because otherwise,
Yeah.
we're not lending on that property. And I think that's a lot of sort of get out of jail card is that people think they can just slap an indemnity on something and that excuses it during the transaction.
Yeah, I've heard similar things. We've involved the chimneys was actually on my notes to discuss because that's a really common one that again because trades or certain builders have always done it a certain way and always got around it. That doesn't mean to say that it's the right and it'll never be a problem. So the indemnity thing is again it's almost just like kicking the can down the road
Yeah,
and passing the risk onto someone else. And it's in the simplest terms, it's the understanding of implications of making changes to properties that builders and sometimes developers don't fully appreciate. They think that it's it will be okay. Just and a builder gives them the reassurance that they've always done it a certain way. But chimneys is a real typical one where gallows brackets. You might have heard of that term before. Would just stick some steel angles underneath the chimney up in the loft space and have done with it. But it's only becoming clear now that more and more approval bodies, um, building control officers, are becoming more consistent in saying that that isn't always okay. If you've got a scenario where you're at the end of a run of terraces, for example, what happens to the other side of that wall that you've taken out? What's the consequence on neighbouring properties and stability? It's you'll get mixed responses from local authorities, but I'd like to say that with these like changes in legislation and I suppose the awareness slowly getting better, that hopefully will diminish. But it's still a problem, Chris, all the time. One person says one thing and another one says another.
just on that, chimneys are a really good telltale sign of structural issues, aren't they? Because I've seen houses where basically no one's noticed that there are any sort of cracks or anything going on in the property, and then suddenly someone just decides to look up, and you've got a chimney on a terraced house pulling away from the other chimney, and you start to see this gap appear where whoever has owned that house previously have decided to fill the gap with polyfiller, to try and excuse the fact that the whole house has moved and it's now actually splitting in half away from the other house. Um,
Yeah.
what with chimneys, I think we should probably stress the point. They are like one of the first things that you should be looking at with any property, but they get massively overlooked because they're so high up. What sort
Yeah.
of things would you be looking at with the chimney?
Well, I think the point there that you've just made quite clearly is to look everywhere and to actually step back. If you are looking at a property to invest in, you need to not just walk through the doors and look at the space and see whether it can be, suit the development that you've got in mind for it. You need to step back and actually take the whole of the property in. So chimneys is a great example because generally speaking, they are bits of really heavy masonry that is often nowadays seen as being in the way because we don't necessarily have uh, coal fires anymore or use them the same way as they were built. But because they're so big and heavy, they're not properly fully, and without taking the whole chimney down, you will have to try and support that somewhere. If you don't do it at above your ceiling level or in your loft, you've got to find somewhere for it. So yeah, you're right. It's an easy telltale to know whether or not there has been alteration. So the key is take a step back and get your head in the loft as well. Don't be afraid of saying, "Well, I don't have a set of ladders, or whatever." Well, find a way of getting your head in that loft and just having a look because if you don't if you don't give yourself the chance to take some photos and just at least if you don't understand what you're looking at, take some photos and share it with the likes of us and go, Josh, what do you think to this? Should I be concerned? and you should there should be things to prompt you to go, well, actually, yeah, this doesn't feel right. Like you've mentioned there, I can see the chimney above the house, but I don't see anywhere any chimneys in any of the rooms. Should I, the next step is get your head in the loft and see what's happening.
Yeah. Um, and we mentioned at the start of this webinar about underpinning, which is a dead interesting subject, and I know we won't cover it all before the end of this, but um, there are some big myths around underpinning, particularly where developers are concerned. I actually sort of whispered in your ear at that event at the Real Property Network. Is it still back when I was a estate agent? It was 10 grand a square foot. Is that still the measurement for it? Is that still how you price it? And you said it's actually no. It's a bit more expensive than that, but it's also a bit
Yeah,
more. There's a bit more of an exact science to it, rather
yeah,
than yeah, trying to sort of just do a fag packet calculation. So
yeah.
when would underpinning sort of be necessary, and what sort of does it mean for the property? Could you just give us a bit of a sort of a rundown on it?
Yeah. So I think when I mentioned earlier about trying to identify the issue, if you've found an issue and it is a crack and it would suggest that there is foundation movement, then you need to go through a minimum amount of investigation with a structural engineer, possibly with a geotechnical engineer, to go, actually, we have established that there is subsidence or foundation settlement affecting this property. Only at that point do you go, right, well, actually, you've got to ask yourself, is this a progressive issue, i.e., is it still moving and has it still got risk of moving? Or is it historic and has it happened and now it's just settled to a point where it's not going to get any worse? That can only, the answer to that question, that query can only be done over sometimes 6, 9, 12 months, because a structural engineer would need to monitor the issue to know actually it's not changing. So we get involved with instances like this where we go, actually, we've monitored it, we know it's a progressive issue. If it's a progressive issue, then we need to understand why is it continuing to move in, and that's when further investigation into is it the found is it a drainage issue, is it the soil that the foundation sat on. So underpinning comes into play when you have established what the cause of the settlement is. And in the simplest terms, underpinning is a solution that allows you to correct or support the foundation from a level in which it won't be susceptible to movement. So if we found the example that I shared on that talk, Chris, was a scenario where we'd found through investigation that property had been founded on a former quarry, and it had basically been through a combination of a load of dense trees in the area, broken drainage, and actually being founded on I would say a sub base that contains some fines within it, meant that fines, the sands that were supporting this raft of the property, were gradually being washed away. So in theory, well, not in theory, in actual fact, it created a void under the foundation. So we established that over a period of investigations, and we know we needed to take the foundations down to a strata, a part of the ground that wasn't susceptible to movement. So underpinning is, in its simplest terms, concrete that's put in stages, in sections of what we have to say pins, and they typically can be about a meter in length, and you're trying to re-support the foundation such that it will no longer be subject to that movement. What I would say is there are now specialist companies that are getting really quite popular that can do the same type of thing without the level of work that would involve. So underpinning in concrete underpins is more of a traditional, old-fashioned way of tackling the issue, which is still done, but there's cost and there's risk and there's a lot of, I would say, spoil in terms of mess around the property that's caused through that, versus modern methods now, where actually, if it's been established that the ground can be stabilized by more discrete methods, and these discrete methods are basically specialist injections that can go in the ground now and effectively lock, almost like freeze the ground in place with resin. We're by no means specialist in this, or I've got any experience really in it. But we're getting more involved now with specialists who design and deliver this. There's obviously a cost implication to doing that, just as there is a traditional route. But what I'm trying to say is that now there are more options available than probably there used to be, to go actually, if you know you've got an issue that requires underpinning of some sort, it can be tackled in a few different ways.
And you mentioned sort of settlement as a more broader term, but there are some people that would sort of, when you are trying to identify structural issues, that will just go, that's just historic, that's just a bit of settlement, that it's not a proper structural issue.
Yeah.
So is time your best friend in that situation? Like you said, just monitor it. If you're really concerned, you need to get yourself out or a structural engineer to come and have a look at it. But actually, whether that increases over a period of time will determine whether that property is actually in 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 an issue.
Yeah. So you've got to ask yourself, why do we, if it's a progressive issue, then that means it's going to potentially get worse, and that can have catastrophic effects versus a historic issue, which you really want to give maybe a lender or a valuer the confidence that it isn't going to affect the property.
Mm.
So yeah, you're right. Time is useful. You need a period of time to actually go through. You need to start with an investigation to know actually where is the issue coming from, and that could be a series of holes in the ground that are around the house to see what's actually happening down at foundation level. But yeah, to actually give a lender the confidence that it isn't going to be a problem, it isn't a quick there isn't a quick answer that we as engineers can say categorically, unless we know, as I mentioned earlier, that actually it's an issue associated with the structure, that it might be, a corroded lintel, a failed lintel, for example. That's a common one. So on older buildings, they don't put lintels in like they do nowadays in terms of a steel one. You might have a cracking above a window in a ground floor. That's a local issue to do with the structure above the ground. Um, they're the things that we can quite categorically help you find and say, yeah, that's a local issue. That's not a progressive issue. It can be dealt with by a builder replacing X, Y, or Z. The issue with the ground and as I say, anything that is associated with ground movement is it needs the period to actually to demonstrate to a lender or for ourselves to give you the confidence that actually the changes in seasons, for example, through winter, through summer, drying and wetting of soils, isn't going to cause ongoing movement.
Josh, I could talk to you for hours, honestly. I'm starting to regret my decisions. I should have gone to uni and done structural engineering. I'm
Well,
so
that's
fascinated by it.
nice. That's nice to hear because it's not an interesting subject for everybody, but we're pretty passionate about it. So
Yeah, 100%. And I think we're quite fortunate to live in a country where it's so so many different elements can affect the property and the way it's the structural integrity and it there's just so many layers to it that you can just sort of explore and I find it so fascinating. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on this evening. I really appreciate it. We've just had a question come in from Emma. So before we get on to our question from Emma, where can people find you, Josh, if they want to reach out to you?
right, so I'll just share a quick slide just so you can take some information. We are based in Chesterfield, so we are just in between Sheffield and Nottingham. I'll just share my screen. You can grab some details. As I say, we're a team of 5 growing to 6, so we're quite a small team, but we're really positive. Just share some details now. There we go.
Right, we've got it. Great.
Okay, there we go. Just so we can drop some details down there. My email's on there, our website. If you'd like to have a look, I will be sharing these details and a little bit more about us on the UK Home Network app after the call.
Great. Yeah. And
Right.
if
Yeah.
there's anyone that you think would benefit from watching this back, our interview with Josh, send them to the On Demand Webinars tab tomorrow and they'll be able to watch it back in full. Josh, we'll keep that on the screen for just a couple of minutes and we'll go
Yeah.
to Emma's question so people can reach out to you, drop you an email. Looking at a property that has subsidence due to brine extraction. Oh, I've never heard of that one. I love it. Brine extraction, salt mining in the area. Is this something that could be fixed with underpinning?
That is a very unique one. Salt mining, again, it's a similar mining generally means that there's been some disturbance in the ground. I would say underpinning possibly not, because it's likely that that might be a issue at serious depth below the property. So, like mining issues, that can often be dealt with by, I would say, more, let's say, involved underpinning strategies, which are basically like piling or stabilization. Grout injection is one that's often referred to. What in these type of scenarios, I'd always refer you to a specialist geotechnical engineer to basically understand what the issue is, and then what they would do is they would work with us to work out how can we create a foundation resolution, basically. So, as I say, we are experienced in using geotechnical information, but we aren't best placed to obtain what is the what is the consequence of that mining in that area. So more than happy to sort of help, Emma, if you want to give us an email or a call.
Amazing. Was that on your top trumps for questions that you'd get this evening? Salt mining,
Not
brine
salt mining,
extraction?
no, no, quite. It's good that it's yeah, it's a unique issue. But again, if it's a real issue, we want to help you.
Emma, you've made my evening. I'm going to be spent while I'm eating my dinner Googling salt mining and brine extraction and structural issues related to it. So thank you so much for that. I do love the questions that come in, and that's a brilliant one. Yeah, Josh, thank you so much for this evening. I really do appreciate it. We'll have to get you back on. In my ideal world, I'd have you back on next week, because there's so much we've not even scratched the surface. But we'll get you on in the next few weeks, if you're available, and
Of
yeah, we'll
course.
go into a little bit more detail about some of these issues and really explore them. So. I hope everyone's enjoyed it. Obviously, Josh will be posting in the platform after. So if you do have a particular project that you're working on at the moment that you need help with, or there's something that you're looking at buying, then please do reach out to Josh. As he says, he likes to explain it in very, very straightforward and simple terms. So yeah, I can't recommend him enough. Yeah, so Josh, thank you. I hope you've enjoyed it, and yeah, we'll
Really
catch up.
have, yeah. Thanks, Chris.
Great stuff. Guys, we'll catch up with you next week. Please keep your posts coming in the UK Homes Network platform. We'll have another webinar lined up for you next week, and the recording will be out tomorrow. Please do make sure you get your tickets for Leeds. I'm trying to strong arm Josh into coming along, so you'll be able to meet him in person. And yeah, we've also got our London event towards the end of the year. So if you'd like any more details on that, please do reach out to me. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you next week.